Maurice Breck, a worn carpenter from Millbrook, found an orc and her son trembling with cold and hunger in the middle of the snow. He could have kept walking, but something deep stirred in his chest, and that choice cost him everything he had, and gave him everything he was missing. Maurice Breck's reputation in Millhaven was not grand, but it was precise. He fixed what others discarded. Chairs with crooked legs, gates that squealed, wagons with worn axles. They came to his cottage at the edge of the old road, and left working again, even if only for one more winter. He charged little because he had little, and because he had learned early that honest work feeds less than it should. But it feeds. The cottage itself was living proof of the philosophy. A roof patched with 3 different kinds of tile, a door that closed if you pulled it up slightly before turning the latch, a kitchen window sealed with a strip of leather he had cut from an old belt. Cozy, a generous person might say. Improvised, Millhaven would say. Maurice preferred the word functional. That morning in frost month, the deepest month of winter, when the Tescan froze at the edges and the wind came down from Iron Peak with teeth, he woke before the rooster and lay staring at the ceiling. There was a new damp stain near the central beam. He added it mentally to the list of things needing attention, then lay there a moment longer, counting in silence. Flour for 15 days, turnip for 12, firewood for 21 if he rationed carefully. Alone, winter was manageable. Maurice was somewhere in his mid-40s, with hands cracked by cold and by the handle of his chisel. He had lost his mother in the northern marches when he was 8 years old. Winter fever that kills the unprepared, in a place where there was no silver for the healer and no neighbor willing to open their door. He remembered her lips going white, her breathing rasping like green wood in the fire, and then the silence. He also remembered the hunger, 3 days without eating while he watched over her body, waiting for the thaw to open the road. That night, alone in the cold, he had made a promise. Never close my door. Never let anyone go hungry while I have a crust of bread in the pantry. He got up, lit the fire, warmed the leftover turnip stew from the evening before, and ate standing up, looking through the window at the snow falling thick over Millhaven. He had a shelf to deliver in Grayfen before the road became impassable, and Dalryn at the sawmill had promised half the payment up front if he arrived before midday. He hitched the mare. Archer blew white steam when he adjusted the bridle. He ran his palm across her muzzle. The usual gesture, the one that said, "I know it's cold, I know you're old, just one more time." The wagon wheels sang on the ice like green wood in a fire. Maurice adjusted his coat, tucked his gloved hands between his knees, and let his gaze drift along the edge of the road, where bare oak trees made dark silhouettes against the white. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. He wasn't expecting anything. It was exactly the kind of morning when the things that change a life arrive without warning. It was the smell that stopped him. Old iron and something damp, warm in the midst of the biting cold, the kind of smell that years of work had taught him to recognize, blood that had already cooled but hadn't fully dried. Maurice pulled the reins. Acker stopped with a grateful snort. Along the banks of the Tescan, beneath a fallen oak that formed a narrow hollow between the trunk and the riverbank, 2 shapes hunched against the wind, one large, one small. He climbed down from the wagon with his hand already on the handle of the chisel at his belt, not as a threat, but out of habit. He approached slowly, stepping on the packed snow at the frozen bank's edge, and stopped when he could make out the face. The orc was young, younger than he would have expected to see alone on a border road in the worst month of the year. Her dark hair was pinned back any which way behind her neck, her left shoulder wrapped in a rag bandage that had long since turned from red to dark wine in the frost. The green skin was ashen at the cheekbones, a sign of deep cold, cold that had already passed through pain and was moving toward numbness. In her arms, curled like a fox kit in a den, was an orc child. 6 years old, perhaps, eyes green as stone moss, open and fixed on Maurice, with the attention of someone calculating whether they need to run. The child opened its mouth. The voice came out small, hoarse with cold. "Mister, Mommy and I are very cold and hungry." Morris felt those words drive into his sternum like a forge spike. The weight beneath them was the same weight he had known when he was 8 years old, and hunger was his only company. He said nothing. He crouched down to the oak hollow, slid his arms beneath the wounded orc's body, and lifted her with the labored effort of a man accustomed to carrying beams, not people. She weighed little. She weighed too little. Bones visible beneath the green skin, the musculature that should have been dense and powerful, reduced by days without food. "Can you help me walk?" she murmured. It was not a question of weakness. It was a question of honor. From someone who didn't want to be carried, if she could spare the other person the effort. "You don't need to," Morris said. "Hold the boy." She adjusted her arms around Vryn. The boy didn't take his eyes off Morris for a single second, and he carried them to the wagon. He opened the canvas cover, settled them both on the burlap sacks he used to pad his tools, and wrapped Vryn in his own wool coat without thinking of it as sacrifice, only as logic. The boy was smaller. He would get cold faster. From his saddlebag he pulled the only piece of day-old bread he'd kept for the journey back. He pressed it into Vryn's hand without ceremony. The boy looked at the bread, then at Morris, then at his mother. "Eat," said the orc softly, in the human tongue, with an accent heavy with hard consonants. Vryn ate, too slowly for a hungry child, as if he were afraid it would run out. Morris climbed back up to the wagon bench, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at Echa. The wheels began to groan on the ice again. The lights of Millhaven would take longer than they should to appear, and the wind had closed in completely. Behind him, in the silence beneath the canvas, he heard the boy say something quietly to his mother, in the orc tongue, words he couldn't understand, but the tone that he understood. It was the tone of someone surprised by kindness for the very first time. The leaky cottage had never seemed so small. Morris rearranged the space with the efficiency of someone who had rearranged cramped workshops before. The narrow cot in the alcove went to Zeria, who had given her name just like that, dry, like someone delivering a necessary piece of information. And Vryn slept curled against her, wrapped in everything Morris had managed to gather in the way of blankets and burlap sacks. Morris slept in the chair by the fire, which was nothing new. The next morning he took inventory, with the coldness of someone who already knows the numbers will come up short. Flour for 15 days, turnip, salt, half a tin of salted pork, firewood for 3 weeks if the cold didn't worsen. Calculated for one man alone. Divided by 3, it came dangerously close to not enough. He began rationing without announcing it. He simply started serving the bowls differently, Vryn's portion a little larger, Zeria's corresponding to what she needed to heal, his own growing smaller. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was arithmetic. In the days that followed, he went to 3 neighboring farms asking for a sack of flour. He came back empty-handed from all 3. Every farmer had his own family to feed, his own winter to get through. Each man for himself, Morris. "It's frost month." Zeria noticed the rationing on the second day. "You're eating less," she said from the alcove, while he stirred the stew with his back to her. "The smaller bowl holds less," Morris answered, which was neither a truth nor a lie, only a deflection. She was quiet for a moment. "Don't do that." "Already did." Another silence, then tell me what I can do while I can't get up," he thought. "Can you make net knots?" "I can make war rope knots. Should be the same." It was. She spent the following days lying down, mending a fishing net belonging to neighbour Aldrich that Morris had promised to fix 2 months ago. Long, strong fingers moving through the cord with a precision surprising in someone whose hands were accustomed to holding axes. Millhaven reacted the way a small village reacts to the unexpected, with stares first, whispers next, and comments at the iron mug last. "Morris Breck brought in an orc," said Dereth, the blacksmith's wife, to anyone who would listen. With a cub, someone added. It'll end badly, concluded Aldrich, who was a pessimist by vocation, though he was satisfied when the net came back amended. The village elder Brennan sent for Morris 3 days after his return. Morris went, stood before the man's table, and listened to the concerns with the expression of someone waiting for rain to pass so he can get back to work. I understand the situation, said Brennan, in the tone of someone who does not understand and does not wish to. But Bloodstone is watching this route. If there's an identified orc here, she's wounded and has a 6-year-old son, said Morris. That doesn't change. She's wounded and has a 6-year-old son, Morris repeated in the same tone, like someone rereading a sum the other person had added up wrong. Brennan dismissed him without resolution. That, Morris had learned early, was the way men of position had of saying, I won't help, but I won't stop you either. He walked back to the cottage. Vryn was sitting on the floor near the fire, examining with scientific seriousness a piece of wood he had taken from the scrap-box in the workshop. What are you doing? Morris asked. Trying to understand how you make the shapes. Morris picked up a small chisel, the safest one he had, and sat on the floor beside the boy. Like this, he said, and he began to teach. That night, from the alcove, Zeria watched them with half-open eyes, her shoulder still aching, her chest doing that strange and uncomfortable thing she didn't know how to name, but which had something to do with watching her son smile for the first time in 4 weeks. The snow had stopped for 2 days, the false pause that Frostmonth sometimes offered before tightening its grip, and Morris had taken the chance to cover the new hole in the roof with a cedar plank pulled from an old workshop shelf. He was on the roof when Zeria came outside for the first time since her arrival. She still limped, but the shoulder had closed enough for her to carry firewood with her right arm. He watched her stack the wood with the precise organization of someone trained for it. Vrak, sure, she said that night while Vryn slept in the alcove with his half-carved piece of wood clutched in his fist. Morris looked up from the plank he was smoothing at the table. It's a debt, she continued, without him having asked for an explanation. From our lineage, the Iron Peak Ashborn were guardians. We protected the trade routes between the Orc territories and the human villages, not by any lord's command, but by ancient agreement. Honor for honor, safe passage for honest passage. She turned the grandmother's knife between her fingers, short, blackened from use, with a symbol carved into the handle that he couldn't decipher. When Bloodstone's men closed the routes and scattered the clan, the debt was left without an owner. It can't stay without an owner, it passes to whoever remains. And whoever remained was you, said Morris, and Vryn. A pause. He won't inherit this, not if I can help it. Morris was quiet, smoothing the same part of the plank that was already smooth. That was what he did when he was truly thinking. She waited. She didn't press. There was something in her, a quality of patience that reminded him of stone, of deep water, that left room for words to arrive at their own pace. What's the symbol? He asked, indicating the handle of the knife. Debt fulfilled with honor. She raised her eyes. It's what I carve when I've paid what I owe. And when you carve it on a place, what does it mean? That whoever touches that place answers to the clan. A slight pause, even if the clan is only me and a 6-year-old boy. There was something between them in that moment, nameless, without form, but as real as the wood beneath Morris's hands, something that needed time and didn't need to be hurried. I'll make more stew, he said, getting up. Morris. She waited until he turned around. Thank you for not asking whether I deserved help before you helped me. He didn't know what to say, so he did what he knew how to do. He went back to the pot and let the silence be enough. Vryn had kept the bread. Morris discovered this by accident, 3 weeks after their arrival, when he went to fetch an extra blanket from the chest in the alcove and found the piece of day-old bread wrapped in a strip of linen, hidden at the bottom between 2 folded blankets. It was hard as stone, completely unfit to eat. He stood looking at it for a moment, the blanket in his hand, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Vryn appeared in the alcove doorway, barefoot on the cold floor, and saw what Morris was holding. He went completely still, the stillness of a child caught doing something he wasn't sure was wrong. "It's the first one," the boy said at last, with a gravity that belonged to someone much older. "The first one you gave me." Morris set the blanket slowly back in the chest. "Why did you keep it?" Vryn considered the question carefully. "Mama said that when someone gives you food when they don't have to, it's different from when they give you food because they have to. I wanted to remember what different felt like." Morris nodded. "You're not going to eat it?" "No." A pause. "Do you need it back?" "No." Vryn relaxed almost imperceptibly. "Then can it stay here?" "It can stay here." The boy disappeared back into the alcove with the tranquility of someone who has just solved an important problem. Morris stood in the middle of the room for a time he couldn't measure, his throat doing that tight thing it does when you're trying not to feel what you're already feeling. The following afternoon, Vryn brought to Morris's work table the piece of wood he had tried to carve alone and set it carefully among the chisels. "Can you teach me the fish shape?" he asked. "Mama likes fish." Morris pulled out the low stool he used when teaching proportions for smaller pieces and gestured for the boy to sit. It was 2 hours of concentrated work, Vryn with his tongue slightly out to the side, the way focused children do, and by the end there was a roughly recognizable fish emerging from the cherry wood Morris had chosen for being softer on small hands. When Zaria came in with the day's firewood, and Vryn ran to her with the fish held out in both hands, Morris had his back turned, apparently reviewing his tools. But he heard the sound she made. It wasn't a word. It was that thing that comes before words, when feeling arrives before language, and he had to apply considerable effort to keep looking at the tools. That night, when Vryn was asleep with the wooden fish under his pillow, Zaria set a bowl of birch-bark tea on the edge of Morris's work table, said nothing, and went back to the alcove. It was exactly the tea he had mentioned 2 days before, that helped with the pain in his hands in the cold. He had mentioned it in passing, not expecting anyone to take notice. She had taken notice. The night Morris left for Goldport to look for work was the coldest of frost month. He had set out before dawn with Acha trotting cautiously on the ice, tools loaded in the wagon bed and enough hope for a round trip. A merchant in Goldport had sent word needing 3 new windows before the thaw. Good work, payment in silver, enough to restock the pantry that winter was steadily emptying. Zaria had stayed at the door, watching the wagon disappear around the bend in the road. "Will he be back before night?" Vryn asked from inside the cottage. "He'll be back," she said, and she didn't know why she was so certain of it, but she was. The torches appeared 4 hours after sunset. She saw them through the crack in the window. 4 points of light on the road, moving with the military regularity of someone not trying to hide. Men on horseback. She had been trained to recognize that rhythm. She saw the crests when they came close enough. The black falcon of bloodstone, with wings spread over a field of red. The symbol of Captain Bracker's mercenaries, known for clearing isolated orcs from trade routes so the lords could collect tolls without interference. Her body knew before her mind did. "Vryn!" Her voice was low and precise. "Under the floorboards, take the wool blanket. Stay quiet until I call you." "Mama, go!" The boy went. Another thing the body knows. When your mother uses that tone, you obey. She took the wood-splitting axe from behind the door, long handle, good blade, familiar, and waited. Not with fear, with the exact concentration of someone who has been a guardian long enough to know that fear, at the wrong moment, kills. What happened between the arrival of the torches and dawn, Millhaven never fully knew. What it saw the next morning, two of Bracca's soldiers sitting outside the cottage with their hands tied to their own reins, two riderless horses by the side of the road, and Zeria on the porch, her shoulder re-stitched with a bone needle, by herself during the night, with the axe resting across her knees, with the calm of someone waiting for coffee to brew. The other two had fled in the darkness. Morris's wagon wheels ground on the ice in the first light. He saw the full picture before climbing down from the bench. He stood still for a moment, reins in hand, the bound soldiers, the forced door, Zeria on the porch, the axe, the restitched shoulder, and felt all of it settle onto him with the specific weight of a night that had happened without him there to face it. He climbed down. He walked to the porch with slow steps. There was something Zeria was calculating in him. He could sense the look of someone bracing for a possibility that hurt, but that they considered honest. "They went for reinforcements," she said, without preamble. "Bracca pays well for an identified orc on a border route. You can still hand me over. It would buy food for the whole winter." Morris looked at her, looked at the crack in the floorboards where two green eyes watched him without blinking, looked back at Zeria. "Bread and shelter in exchange for protection," he said slowly, like someone recalling aloud a contract they had signed. "That was the agreement." She waited. "There's no silver, no food, no winter that changes an honest agreement." Morris went to the back storehouse, retrieved the long knife he kept in the lining of his boot, and cut the reins of the bound soldiers' horses, left the animals free in the snow. The men on foot in the ice, then went inside the cottage, lifted the floorboard, and reached his hand down into the darkness. A smaller hand grabbed his. Vryn came out from under the floorboards with his hair in disarray and eyes too serious for a child. He stood, looked at his mother on the porch, looked at Morris. "Is it over?" he asked. "Not yet," Morris said honestly. "But it will be." The three of them rode the wagon to Millhaven, Morris on the bench, Zeria beside him with the axe across her lap, Vryn in the middle, as if this were an ordinary weekend outing. The two bound soldiers in the wagon bed complained for most of the journey. Morris didn't answer. Zeria didn't look back. Elder Brennan was at the village hall when Morris walked in with the captives. There were others present. The blacksmith, two councillors, Dereth, who had arrived too quickly not to have been waiting for some kind of drama, and all of them fell silent, watching soldiers of Bloodstone being dragged through the door by a carpenter in breeches patched with raw leather. Morris laid out the facts with the conciseness of someone who dislikes unnecessary words. Bracca's men, operating in civilian territory, assault on private property, two captives as proof, two more fled in the direction of Bloodstone. Brennan looked at the captives, at Morris, at Zeria, who had stayed by the door with Vryn, not entering, as someone who respects that this conversation belongs to the village, not to her. "You refused Bracca's silver," said Brennan. It was a question dressed as a statement. "It was Bracca's silver," said Morris, as if that were self-explanatory. "You barely have food for 3 mouths in the worst month of winter." Morris considered that for a moment. "Because silver you spend," he said at last, in the calm voice of someone stating basic arithmetic. "Honor you inherit." The silence in the village hall lasted a few seconds. The blacksmith was the first to laugh, not in mockery, but in recognition, the kind of laugh that escapes when someone says aloud a thing you already knew, but had never put into words. The proceedings against Bracca took a week of messengers between Millhaven and the Goldport Council. The outcome? Banishment from the routes near the Tescan. The captives sent for judgment, a fine that Bloodstone's men would pay or not, depending on how much the council needed their coin that season. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for the winter. On the afternoon the messenger brought confirmation from the council. Morris returned to the cottage and found Zeria on the porch, with the grandmother's knife in her right hand, carving something into the main beam of the door, short, precise strokes, so focused she hadn't heard him arrive. When she finished and stepped back to look at her work, he came closer, and examined the symbol carved into the wood. The same lines as on the knife handle, but larger, permanent. "Debt fulfilled with honor," he said. She looked at him, mildly surprised that he had remembered. "Whoever touches this door answers to the clan," she confirmed. A pause. "Even if the clan is only me and a 6-year-old boy." "And a patched-up carpenter," said Morris, without thinking too much about it. Zeria was quiet for a moment. Then, very calmly, in a way that seemed harder than holding an axe against 4 soldiers, she said, "Yes, and a patched-up carpenter." The thaw arrived in Meltmonth, the way it always arrived at the Tescan, from the bottom up, the ice at the edges going dark before giving way, the water running underneath before appearing at the surface. Morris woke one morning to a different sound from the drips. No longer the ping of melting ice, but the continuous flow of water that had found its way through. Roof still leaking. But winter had passed. Vryn was the first to notice something had changed in the air. Children have that sense adults slowly lose, the sense of when a season ends. He went out barefoot onto the porch in the morning, stepped in the mud of the thaw, and came back with the expression of someone confirming a hypothesis. "The snow is gone," he announced, as if that required an official announcement. That afternoon, Vryn brought to Morris's work table a small cherry-wood plaque he had carved alone, the size of his hand, with 3 words in the Orc tongue, the letters uneven but recognizable. He held it out to Morris with both hands. "What does it say?" Morris asked. "Honor, debt, home." Vryn waited. "You said you wanted to learn." Morris looked at it for a moment, then accepted it with hands that knew how to receive things carefully. "You can hang it on the door," Vryn said, with the practicality of someone who had already decided where it should go. "On the inside, so you see it when you come in." Morris hung the plaque that same night. The following week, Zeria went to the Millhaven market for the first time. Morris went along, not as an escort, because she didn't need an escort, but because it was a weekday and he was going to buy nails anyway. Dereth at the blacksmith's counter greeted them, not warmly but correctly, the kind of correctness that in Millhaven is worth more than friendliness, because it's rarer. Aldrich at the Iron Mug called out the window, "Morris, the net came out perfect. What does your guest charge?" Zeria looked at Morris. Morris looked at Aldrich. "She doesn't charge anything right now, but she may need flour after the planting season." "Done," said Aldrich, without negotiating, which in Millhaven was the highest available form of generosity. On the way back, with Vryn running ahead, chasing his own breath of white steam in the still cold morning air, Zeria walked beside Morris along the mud-streaked Thor road. "It's changing," she said, indicating the village with a minimal tilt of her head. "Millhaven changes slowly," Morris said, "but it changes." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how long I can stay." "I didn't ask for a deadline," said Morris. She turned her face toward him slightly, just enough for him to see the line of her expression shift, that loosening he had begun to recognize and that she had begun to stop hiding. "Morris. When I was a guardian, I learned that a home is not the place where you were born. It's the place where someone stayed." He didn't answer right away. He stood watching Vryn, who had stopped to examine something at the edge of the road with his usual scientific seriousness. "It's a cottage with a leaky roof," Morris said at last. "The door doesn't close right if you don't pull it up a little before turning the latch." "I know how to close the door," Zeria said. "I know you do." The two of them walked at the same pace through the thaw mud, without more words for a while, but it was the silence of after, not of before, the silence of two people who no longer need to measure the space between them. Spring found Morris Breck's cottage different from all the springs before it. The roof had been remade, not patched, remade, with oak planks that Morris had cut and Zeria had carried in the week before the full thaw. the two of them working in coordinated silence, like tools that had learned each other's weight. The door closed without the latch trick. The kitchen window had new glass, paid for with the work on the 3 Goldport windows, whose merchant had honoured the contract even after learning there was an orc in the carpenter's cottage, especially after learning, the man had said, with the pragmatic logic of someone who understands that a guardian on the Tescan route is worth more than prejudice. Vryn learned to shave wood with the right angle of the chisel, still uneven, but in the right direction, which was what mattered. The cherrywood plaque, with the 3 words in the orc tongue, hung on the inner side of the door, as he had asked. Morris had learned them by heart in the following weeks, practicing under his breath each morning while lighting the fire. Honour, debt, home. Vryn was teaching him a 4th. Elder Brennan stopped Morris on the road one morning in Blumenth. "The village is asking," said Brennan, in the manner of someone who had been delegated against his will, "whether the orc is staying." "The village can ask her," said Morris. "You know how it is." Morris knew. Millhaven didn't ask directly about the things that mattered. It asked around them, left the space in the middle, waited for someone to fill it. "She has the Vraksha carved into the beam of my door," said Morris. "That means whoever touches that door answers to her clan." A pause. "I'd rather have that clan on my side." Brennan stood there a moment. He nodded, with the manner of someone who would go and repeat that to everyone, as if it had been his own idea. That night, Morris was on the porch watching the Tescan, full again, brown with the thaw, alive, when Zeria came out and stood beside him. Not too close. Close enough. "You told the elder I'm staying," she said. "I told him you have the right." A long pause. The river made the sound rivers make when snow melts, full and urgent and ancient. "I want to stay," she said, quietly, without drama. The way true things are said when people already know they're true, but still need to say them out loud. Morris said nothing for a moment, then very slowly, with the same deliberateness with which he measured wood before cutting, because you can't cut twice what you got wrong the first time, he turned his face slightly toward her. She was looking at the river, but there was an angle to her shoulders, a minimal openness in her posture that he had learned to read. It was the angle of when she was letting someone approach. He moved his hand, slowly, without hurry, and rested it on hers where it lay on the porch railing. She didn't pull back. She turned her hand and closed her fingers over his, with the quiet firmness of someone making an agreement they intend to honor. They stayed like that for a while, watching the Tescan, with their hands intertwined in the cold that had not quite gone away. From inside the cottage, Vryn slept with the wooden fish under his pillow and the golden bread in the chest, kept not because he feared going hungry again, but because he always wanted to remember what it felt like when someone gave without having to. The iron mug began serving turnip stew with dark bread for 2. And no one in Millhaven ever closed their door again when the snow closed in, and least of all when hunger came knocking. And the village of Millhaven learned that spring what a patched-up carpenter had known all along, that kindness does not need an audience to be real, that the love which grows slowly from shared bread, from respected silence, from hands that build instead of destroy, is the only love that winter cannot put out. That home is not the most beautiful place you know. It is the place where someone chose to stay,